My name's Jill Rowe, and in this episode of the Different Podcast, Steve Chalke and I talk about being self-controlled. Beginning with reminiscing about an old school assembly, this is an honest conversation and one that takes us into so many areas of life. We discover that being self-controlled isn't solely about not doing certain things. It's also about choosing and being intentional about living in a certain direction and making certain choices, knowing always that this is all a tender invitation, love always inviting us forward. We hope this episode brings you some clarity and some life. It did for us. Well, we're back again, Steve, for another episode.
How exciting. What can I say?
Say it like you mean it.
No, I meant it. I didn't know it came about. I said, how exciting. I mean, I know it is exciting. Of course it is. Do you know why it's exciting, besides anything else? It's a relief for me from writing emails. That's how high it is up for me. No.
That's the thing. Emails are a thing, aren't they?
They are. And going to Teams meetings.
Oh my gosh, does my head in.
Yeah, well, I've been to so many today. Truly, I have. Do you know? And the terrible thing about a Teams meeting is it always starts about 15 seconds after the last one finished.
Yeah, I've got a view on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got a view. Well, I wish you could share it with the world in a meaningful way, because mine's going to go boom, 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 boom.
My view is...
And guess what? The last thing about it is it turns out I'm always the chair. So not only are you there, but you have to be in charge, which means you can't, you lose it for a second. Lose it for 30 seconds, and then you haven't followed the conversation.
Yeah. My view is that maybe we've let Microsoft Teams decide how we want to work, whereas us deciding how we want to work is a much better way to start.
Music to my ears. Do you remember in those old days before?
Do you remember when your diary used to be done with a pencil?
Yeah, I do. And on a paper one. Yeah. Paper one. And do you remember in the old days when you actually used to go to meetings and meet people?
Meet people in real life. And like all of those things. And
how life-giving it actually is when you can do it.
I know,
isn't it?
Exactly.
It's wonderful.
Anyway, maybe we should do an episode all about that, Steve, because I think that would be fascinating.
But we're going to talk
about being self-controlled.
Self-control.
I remember
there you go. Finishing one meeting on time so you're not late for the next.
Exactly. I was thinking about, there's this illustration or this thing that you can do in assemblies to talk to help children and young people understand about self-control, which basically involves a tube of toothpaste where you set a challenge. You can do a really big prize for it because basically it's impossible. Where you've probably done it, though your trick is used to eat £5 notes, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Assemblies, but
it's harder now because they used to be made of paper. Now they're plastic.
I know, that's not so good, is it? Can't crunch them up now. But anyway, this toothpaste tube, what you do, you have a plate and a tube of toothpaste, and you squeeze all the toothpaste out, and then you just ask someone to come and put it all back in. To make the point, because it's impossible, right? Yeah. And to just start to help them understand a little bit about what can happen when you're in a mood and your mood gets out of control, and when you do something that gets out of control, and it's really difficult to then try and pull everything back and try and make things better. Of course, there's always a way through, but and it's just fun squirting toothpaste around. So this thing about being self-controlled is not just about diets and running and, all of that kind of stuff, is it? It's much more than, and it's obviously a lot more than toothpaste as well.
Yeah, a lot more than toothpaste. That's a great illustration.
You're going to have that now,
I remember that. Yeah, that's a fantastic one. It's a lot more than toothpaste. I hardly dare to say what I'm going to say now. I was reading this, a book some years ago, and I have no idea which book it was, who wrote it, but it was a famous author, and it wasn't a novel. It was a book about life, and he said this. He was writing this as an old man. He said, "My problem is that for the first 60 years of my life, I was chained to my penis.
Oh, gosh, I was not expecting that to be said.
Exactly. He said, I was chained to my penis and it dragged me about. He extended this metaphor everywhere. And there you go. That wakes you up. But you know, I thought to myself, what an honest thing for him to write, that he'd lost control. So his addiction had become sex.
Yeah.
Your addiction can be chocolate, sugar,
alcohol,
wine. Yeah. Your addiction can be shopping. Okay. But anything that gets out of control in your life, you lose self-control and it drives you. And then you end up in all sorts of situations that you really wish you weren't in, which is what his book was about.
Yeah.
But the honesty of writing about it, I thought, was quite healing in itself.
Yeah. I mean, I was not expecting you to use that little example, but
there you go.
Hey, it's all good.
No,
but it's the point, isn't it?
Like, it was the honesty. You know, this man's not hiding anything, metaphorically speaking. No, he's not. He's writing. And he's writing in all honesty and saying, this was my struggle.
Yeah.
And I wasn't winning with this.
Yeah.
And the book was about, exactly what we're talking about. But that was his starting place. His addiction wasn't chocolate. His addiction wasn't shopping. His addiction wasn't gaming. His addiction wasn't social media. I think it was written long before you could get addicted to social media. But that was what he battled with.
Gosh, we could go in so many directions with this conversation. I was just thinking about, for some people, the thing that we might struggle to control might be our use of our handheld computers, also known as a mobile phone. You know, they reckon, don't they, that most people, the impact on our brains, that we will pick it up, put it down about every 10 minutes. So you can see like that rhythm in people's lives of like it's become an addiction, that because it's like having crack cocaine in front of you. It's just like this. And it's interesting you were saying that he began with that place of honesty, because obviously if you go to AA or something, that's that's number one, right? Oh, shoot, I can't control this.
Yeah, because you can't move forward until you reach that place of honesty. You're always hard. And like you just said, it is, it's a drug, all of these things. The addiction covers for something else though, doesn't it? You know, so I know myself, if I get home late at night and I'm tired and Corney's gone to bed and the house is empty and I think I'll have a cup of tea. Then I think I'll have some cheese.
Cheese, yeah.
And I
thought you'd say cheese.
Yeah. Then I think
another bit of cheese.
Yeah. And then I'll kind of raid the fridge for stuff.
Munchies.
All sorts of stuff. And it's not because I'm hungry. It's because I'm tired and I've lost energy and you're just looking for some form of comfort, aren't you? That's the reality.
Yeah.
So somebody who has a square of chocolate and then another square and then the whole bar, they're looking for comfort, aren't they? Somebody who goes to buy stuff. I know that myself. You know, I think in years gone past, when I was life seemed boring, you go and think, well, I'll buy something that'll make me feel better. Well, it never did. It just made you poorer, even poorer. So it's that thing, isn't it? And in actual fact, a lot of research recently around brain science shows this. This research is repeated and repeated. And some of my work, you know, with Oasis Restore and working with kids who've you know, through childhood and adolescence have really been starved of the love and the care they need. So we do a lot of thinking around this. But it said, and the research has been done time and time again, if you put a child in an MRI scanner and you show them a picture of their mother, who they have a good relationship with, all sorts of parts of their brain light up electrically. You can see the impact on the parts of their brain that this makes. If you then put the mother in the MRI scanner and show them a picture of the child that she loves, the same parts of her brain light up. Exactly the same parts of the brain light up. If you show somebody who has an addiction to alcohol a glass of wine, exactly the same parts of the brain light up. If you show someone a bar of chocolate has an addiction to chocolate, exactly the same parts of the brain light up. Because what things do that comfort us, love comforts us, it lights up those parts of the brain that produce, for instance, dopamine. What chocolate or a drug, some other drug is dope. It's dopamine. It stands in for what you really crave. And it's where you find comfort in it. But, you know, as Gabor Mate, great psychologist, he says, the problem with anything that's a substitute for love that gives you comfort by eating it or consuming it, a habit or a substance, the problem with it, he says, is that something that doesn't really work in the first place never really works. So you'll always crave another hit and another hit and another hit and another hit because it always leaves you empty. Something that doesn't work never really can be enough. That's what all addiction's about, isn't it?
So self-control, to become more self-controlled, is about our basic instincts. It's about our mind, and it's about our emotions. And just while you're speaking about the brain, help us to understand, Steve. So we've got the amygdala part of the brain, haven't we? Which is the fight, flight, freeze part. And then the prefrontal cortex, the bit at the front, which has this role about rationality and it is the bit that we can call upon to help us stay calm and to soothe and
make good
judgments, all of that kind of thing. And we can develop that part of the brain, can't we? We can strengthen that. And there are lots of things around, even acts of compassion can develop that part of the brain, mindfulness, prayer, meditation, yoga, all of that kind of thing. But that highlights as well, doesn't it, what can happen for a person growing up if we've grown up in an environment where we've not been soothed, or then that just hasn't shaped up in us yet, has it, that bit?
No. One of the things I often say to an audience I'm speaking to, I'm reminded of one last week. I speak a lot of things, don't I?
You do.
So, and
it's hard to keep track.
I looked at this very middle class audience, you know, and all in the middle years, and I said, before you congratulate yourself on how polite and kind and compassionate and generous you are, and how when you were coming in, you stood to one side to allow someone else go in front of you. Before you can congratulate yourself on all those things, remind yourself of this. It's simply because you've got a really well-connected prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
And that you didn't do for yourself. No. Others did it for you through the love they invested in you. Yeah, so self-control, and we should go on in a bit perhaps to talk about how you develop, you know, greater self-control. But there's that thing, isn't there, that all behavior is simply the communication of something. You know, as I often say, you know, Cornelia says to me, the more stressed I am, the more stupidly I behave. I say stuff that I don't really mean. And we all do that, don't we? And when we're calm, we take it back. Because when we're stressed, we find it hard to be self-controlled. And the self-control bit of our brain, as you say, is the front, the prefrontal cortex, the management center of our brain, the bit that listens to all of those emotions burning up inside us and then says, now, don't do that, calm down, don't hit him, smile at him, or whatever. Yeah. And the problem for many people is that because of the lack of care, love that they've received, they've gone for the dope. But it's not the real thing, and whatever that thing is for them, and their prefrontal cortex is very loosely wired.
Yeah. I was working with some leaders the other day, and I just invited them to look at a 24-hour clock and try and like place themselves within the clock and think, when do I feel most at my limit? Like when it comes to self-control, when do I feel the greatest stretch? Is there a rhythm? Is there a pattern to where that's happening? Is it at the end of the day? Is it because you haven't eaten lunch? Is it, all of those factors that can come into play? But self-control isn't just about what we shouldn't do, is it? To be self-controlled is also about having the discipline to do the right thing. That's because I think sometimes it can all be about the, like, oh, you mustn't do this.
Yeah.
Absolutely, of course. But sometimes it's about having the ability to say, this is what I am going to do, isn't it?
This is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to go. This is what I'm going to give. This is what I'm going to say. This is who I'm going to speak up for. Yeah. It's all of those things. Yeah. That's a much better way of thinking about self-control.
Strength right in.
Yeah. And the irony again is the more that you get involved in that, the less time you've got for all the other stuff. So that makes sense.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Completely. And again, I think if when you look at like the AA, the 12 steps of the AA, one of the acknowledgements is surrendering, or the higher notion of a higher power, whether you want to call that God or the universe or whatever that means for you. And then surrendering to the fact that you're not in control. And I think that sometimes by shifting the perspective to what is it I do want to do? What is it? How do I want to live this life out? What are the I think it just really helps in that surrendering process, because there's something shifting in your ego when all that's going on.
And then those things become habits in themselves.
Exactly.
I always think that, going back to brain development and the way our brains work, we create these pathways through our brains, don't they? They're called synaptic connections, neural connections. We create little pathways, habits. That's, one brain cell, one neuron fires the next one, fires the next one, fires the next one. And so you develop this response, which is why, for instance, when you first learn to drive, if you learn to drive, it's such a kerfuffle, isn't it? You're sat there, do I press the brake? Do I hold the handbrake? Do I look in the rear view mirror? Do I change down gear? You can't do all those things, and you have to really concentrate. Whereas once you can drive, you get in a car and you do all those things without even realizing you're doing them. And it's simply because you built those neural pathways, these little pathways in your brain. Like people, when they walk across a cornfield, they make a trail. But if people keep walking across, a pathway arises, and eventually someone comes along and tarmacs it, and
so
then it makes it easy to walk.
Conscious to the
unconscious. So you just do those things. So it's how you build those pathways, which then get easy. It's easier in the end to stay on the path than stray off the path, because you do it automatically. It's like a great tennis player. I once went to Tim Henman's tennis school. I didn't go because I won a scholarship. I won because I went because they wanted me to speak at an assembly. It's a posh school down in Surrey. It's a lovely school, and they've got this tennis centre. And then after I'd spoken, they took me to the big tennis centre, and it was like the sixth formers playing tennis. And I stood at one end behind the baseline, a long way behind the baseline. These are just school kids. I tell you what, the way they hit that ball, it was incredible to stand behind a ball coming at you that fast. You have no chance to even see it hardly until it's gone past, let alone respond to it, work out what shot you're going to play and place it back. It's just incredible. And you realise that the guys that can do that, and this was just school level, the guys that can do that is because they develop neural pathways, and they're not thinking about it. They go, oh, that's coming fast. I think it's all automatic because they built that pathway. It's how we build pathways into our lives, by practicing hard to start with what is difficult. But if you practice what is difficult, it actually becomes a more natural response until you find yourself just doing it without thinking about it.
So for me, as I think about how do you go from things being out of control, not being controlled, to becoming more self-controlled, I think for me, the first base is self-awareness. That's where the journey begins for me. Before I even get to the practice, it's like, oh, that's the thing. Or when someone, you may say, oh, Jill, I've just noticed that you always seem to react when that person like pushes your button, like that's interesting. Oh, that for me, that's a moment of, oh, I need to just acknowledge that. What's going on in that moment so that I can then bring that into my learning of what does a different reaction look like? How do I do this differently?
And sometimes we need help with this. I have a friend who is a great leader, and I learned so much from him. And his name was George, and he died just not so long ago. And so I tell you this story about him only because he told everybody. And I was speaking at something years ago with him. He was a leader of this huge movement, and so he sat around with all these teenagers, and this was a giant conference centre in Europe, and everybody had huge respect for him. And he said, I mean, this is going back to what I was talking about earlier, sex, you see. So he said to them, oh dear, it's such a struggle for me. And he's telling all these kids, but it was such a struggle for me. He said, the other week I was in New York. He comes from New York. He came from New York. He said, but he lived in this country. He said, I was in New York, and he said, I found myself in the centre of, the kind of red light district or whatever it was. I don't know where it was. And he said, like, I can't deal with this. And he said, so I shut myself in a telephone box and I called my friend who lived in another part of New York. And remember, he said in Greenwich Village. And he said, I'm staying in this telephone box and I'm not coming out until you come and get me with your car and drive me home. And don't ask me why, but I am not coming out of this telephone box. And it was a very funny the way he told it. But it was it's to your point, and it was an honesty with these kids who are all struggling with their sexuality, of course. Sexuality is never far from the surface. And don't we know loads of people who just cave in and then regret? And so here's George saying, look, you may look at me as though I'm from another planet and I got all this dealt with in my life, but I'm telling you that everything is about developing the habits you want. And sometimes you need the help of someone else. You need to be held to account. You need to sit down with someone who you really trust.
So self-awareness, community.
Yes.
Like others you need. And then I've got this phrase, Steve, intentional alternative action.
Yes.
Like what's the thing that is the IAA that's different to what has been happening? And that the repetition then of that alternative action, intentional alternative action, starts to build that new pathway in your brain that then becomes... You're very conscious of that choice at the beginning, but then it becomes unconscious, natural.
When I was 24, going on 25, I went to work for a church in Tunbridge in Kent. I was a youth worker. And the minister who'd left there, who'd retired before, so I never worked with him. But when I arrived in this giant church, everybody spoke so well of him. You got the impression from them, and he was a bit like the angel Gabriel or something. They spoke of him so kindly and so well. And then I met him. So it was, probably a year later, I met him, and he was just as everybody said. He was generous. He was kind. He had such presence, that he was always looking at you and seeing you. The conversation became about you, not him. This generosity oozed out of him. But he sat there talking to me about, it was just the two of us. And he told me all about his struggles and his ups and downs and his battles with himself and his own attitudes, etc., etc. And in that moment, I realised, because this man had done the work on himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and was still doing the work on himself. He was so aware of his own slipping and sliding. But the truth is, my experience of him was something entirely different.
Yeah.
Because he'd created those pathways, he walked those roadways, and it had become part of him.
Yeah. It's that notion that the work of contemplation, which creates the self-awareness, that is the work, isn't it? That then leads to the transforming of your own life through your choices and through your behaviours. But what's that? Paul does that. St. Paul does that bit, doesn't he, in Corinthians, where he goes, "Oh, I want to do, but then I don't." And he just goes on and on about this.
Says, the very things I want to do are the things I don't do, and the things I don't want to do are the things that I do. Oh, wretched man that I am! I'm so tied up in this, and I can't get out of it. Yeah. And again, you see, I like that, because he's not saying, "I'm St. Paul, I've got it right." He's telling you, "I'm struggling with this stuff. Everybody's struggling. Yeah. Everybody's struggling with something. I'm working on myself. This is really great, Jill, because I'm going to go away from here this evening. I'm going to say, work on yourself, Steve. That's a good way forward."
But it's tender, isn't it? It's not like this accusatory finger that's going, yeah. It's like, because do this, and then you'll find more flourishing. You'll find greater wholeness. It's not.
Yeah, so we're all in this together, aren't we? So I often think to myself, add something to people's lives, smile at them, bring something good. If you can't think of anything good to bring to somebody's life, don't engage at all, because don't smash stuff up. Yeah. So, Jill, what you said just reminds me of this story about a great friend of mine. His name was Billy. Sadly, he's died. And in the 90s, I got this chance to be on television, on GMTV, Good Morning Television, with Anthea Turner and all that crowd, Lorraine Kelly and all those. And it was great fun. It was at the beginning of my day before I really went to work, I used to go in. But Billy was fantastic. And what you say about don't beat yourself up, it shouldn't be condemning any of this stuff. None of it. Because we bring joy to one another, carry one another. Yeah. That's what we're about anyway. Billy was so helpful to me in so many ways, because I didn't understand how studios worked or how television worked. And often after the show, I'd sit and have a bacon sandwich with him up in the canteen. Yeah, it was great. And he was such great fun, such good company. And but he knew I was a vicar, as they used to call me the TV vicar. I'm a Baptist minister. And so he'd sit there and tell me about all his struggles with life, and this particular day he tells me this whole string of troubles and worries he's got. And then he says, "But, Steve, don't you tell me that I need to go to church." Which I wasn't going to do anyway. He said, "Don't you tell me I need to go to church. Don't try to sell me God." He said, "I've got enough problems in my life as it is without adding to them by going to church." It was a brilliant comment, and it really helped me a lot. Yeah. It helped me a lot, because I saw what I think I had been, perhaps some of the time. I had been that miserable religious bloke who came to tell you how to live your life. You are. Yeah. When Billy was saying, "Don't you do that to me. Life's tough enough already without that religion being thrust at me." And actually, some years later, he died. And the truth is, this is a genuine sadness in my life. I never, ever got to tell Billy how great that piece of advice was for me. It really was great. If I ever wrote a book about the key learning moments in my life, that breakfast with Billy over that bacon sandwich when he said, "And don't you lay on with something." Honestly, it was a foundational moment in the development of my whole way of thinking about life and other people, and the development of Oasis, really, when I learned that our story is to, in terms of self-control, it's to inspire people, not to people down, because we've all been put down by others, and that doesn't get us anywhere.
Absolutely not. Thank you, Steve.